Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and all of our non-binary listeners out there. It is once again that time of the week where we dig underneath the headlines, where we talk about that stuff that the mainstream media is not. Where we talk to activists and organizers locally and abroad, and generally call out the establishment on its BS. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, your only source for political revolution here on the wider airwaves. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM, WIDR Kalamazoo, or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may in fact turn out to be. So we've got a lot coming up on the show today that we need to talk about. Shortly, we're going to be having an interview, local organizer and community advocate, Patrice Nichols. And then later on, our dear Nora is up in Canada, and she filed a report. We'll be playing that later on the show around 6:30 p.m. We also have a lot to talk about. We're going to be doing a bit of a roundup on voter suppression. It's one of the really big stories of this election season that really has not been covered very much or extensively by the mainstream press. It's something, of course, we talk about on the show a lot. But yes, there is indeed quite a lot of voter suppression going on just about all over the country leading up to the 2018 midterms. Also, for those of you who may have noticed, I think a lot of our listeners probably subscribe to a lot of anti-establishment Facebook pages that aggregate content. Well, you might have noticed something last week. So, a lot of them got taken down by Facebook, and we're going to talk about that more in depth later on in the program. Figure, let's go ahead and start the show with a bit of Michigan news that is vitally important for those who've really been keeping their finger on the pulse of our current immigration struggles. And important information in particular for people who might be wary of ICE involvement and activity here in the state of Michigan. I'm going to kind of start. This is from the Detroit Free Press. I'm going to mostly read from the article. This was published yesterday, October 16th. $35 million private immigration detention center proposed for Ionia. A $35 million privately owned federal immigration detention center is being proposed for a former state prison site in Ionia, officials confirmed to the Free Press on Monday. Immigration Centers of America, which operates a similar civil detention facility in Virginia, was the sole bidder for the former Deerfield Correctional Facility, a state prison in Ionia that closed in 2009. I just gotta say, as a side note, what is it with private prison companies always throwing America in their name? I guess like some sort of call to patriotism is supposed to make up for the fact that we're a carceral state. I don't know. Specifically thinking of corporate, what is it? Corrections Corporation of America. They actually changed their name to something a little bit more friendly, kind of to avoid the PR that they've gotten in the last few years. But yeah, again, just kind of like a little side observation there. So I'll go ahead and continue. The state has not yet signed off on the sale after the request for bids by the Michigan Land Bank Fast Track Authority, said Dennis Muchmore, the former chief of staff to Governor Rick Snyder, who is now a lobbyist working for the detention center company. Oh, I'm shocked. Wait, somebody in the Snyder administration is a prison lobbyist? Oh, boy. This is the way our system is, folks. You get involved with an administration, a couple years, you get a cushy job, pushing for private immigration detention centers in our state. Oh boy, this guy must sleep really well at night. I guess that's all I've got to say on that. So, among other necessary steps, the federal government still needs to issue a request for proposals for the facility to hold about 500 to 600 detainees. Because it would involve only civil detention, the 166,000 square foot facility would house immigrants detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, who have not been charged with or convicted of criminal offenses, but instead are being held pending administrative hearing on issues such as deportation. And I do want to take a side note, just like just reading that just now really brings to the forefront of my mind just to the extent to which this has been normalized. This idea that we should lock up people who have not committed any crimes simply because they do not have U.S. citizenship. Now, of course, you have the law and order crowd, i.e., perhaps the conservative aunt or uncle in your family who's like, well, they're breaking the law by being here in the United States. Now, that's a much deeper discussion about economic inequity and why somebody would need to come to the United States to work in the first place. But just this thought, just holding up to 600 people for committing no crime, like no real actual crime, nothing that actually hurts another human being, is, well, it's morally reprehensible, at least in my humble opinion. And we could be seeing one of these things on the east side of the state. Anyway, I'll continue now. Much more said the government could be a long way away. A copy of the company's October 1st proposal, obtained by the Free Press, said the facility expects to receive its permit late next year and open 12 months after that. Land bank officials did not respond to emails and phone calls Monday to say how much the company offered for the former prison. The proposal doesn't mention a purchase price, but says the 600-bed facility for adult men and women would employ about 225 people directly and create tens of millions of dollars in annual economic impact through payroll, purchase of supplies, and spin-off activity. What that means in layman's terms is, the specific town they're talking about building this in, there's a lot of people who live there who are looking about all the jobs it could create, having this immigration facility in their town. We talk a lot on the show about how, something that the political establishment and, particularly Republicans do politically is separate groups and pit them against each other. So in this case, you're creating a scenario where, the morally right thing to do, again, in my humble opinion, would be to say, no, we do not want a damn detention / concentration camp in our town. A hard pass on that. But then again, if you are living in one of these disaffected communities that we have in Michigan, many of which, could have been the subject of a Bruce Springsteen song, the idea of 225 jobs, actually, it sounds pretty appealing. One can understand that to an extent. And, the hard thing, and, granted, like, I don't live in Ionia, I don't live in this town, but I do know a little bit about, basically pushing locally against these ideas that have a lot of money behind them, and they kind of dangle it out in front of the local population as like an economic stimulus, economic boom. Good example about it is like anytime a pipeline is built, you are actively baking in fossil fuel destruction and climate chaos into the system for several decades. But hey, you're creating a few dozen jobs in the meantime. That's not just even with Republicans. There's also a lot of Democrats have kind of come to that crossroads where They feel like they have this choice between standing up for the environment or standing up for either their corporate donors or, in some cases, a lot of steelworker unions who do advocate for the construction of these pipelines so that their union members can get work. So it's for anybody living in that town, I think you need to make that ethical, moral choice as clear as possible. And there's a lot of people who maybe do not have a sense of what these detention facilities do. I think you just need to hammer away the fact that, again, this is being bought up and designed to not house any actual criminals. And to the extent that, of course, things are heavily partisan in this state and throughout the entirety of America. But, I'm a big believer that, you explain something to people the right way, you can pierce through and find their empathy. And that, that's really what you need to do here. You got any relatives out there in Ionia who are going to be living around this proposed immigration site? Have a conversation with them. Talk to them about what these detention facilities are actually like, the reality of it. And give me just a sec, because I'm going to be letting in my co-host. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Got my co-host here, Mr. Lawrence Calvert.
What up?
So I was just talking about this ICE facility they're talking about building over in Ionia. And I guess I just did want to wrap up a couple of important points. Well, again, like they're harping on Russell Harper. He's the president and CEO of Immigration Centers of America. That's the way he's pitching this. He's like, the Deerfield site will become a major employer and taxpayer instead of an abandoned correctional facility. I can think of a lot of better things you could do with an old prison. Like literally anything else.
I mean, we're about to legalize marijuana in the state. You could turn that mug into one of the best growers and dispensaries on that side of the state.
See, man,
what you
got
mean?
some ideas, people.
I mean, you have what does most cannabis growers who are indoors? You already have are indoors. You have and you don't want to, and you want to grow year round, right? Mm-hmm. So that means you want to do it indoors because it snows outside. You could. If it's already a correctional facility, that means it has water and electricity. That means you also can have temperature control. You can control the temperature in said place. Again, I'm thinking your money could be spent better making it a marijuana dispensary and growery. Instead of making it a prison that's going to hold families because our president wants to separate families from children. It's amazing how in Home Alone 2, Donald Trump was helping a kid reunite with their family, but in real life, he's separating kids from their parents. I mean,
that is that establishment propaganda, my man. I always wondered about that movie. It's like, well, man, what did the dad in that movie do to afford a house that big? But
my thing is, I'm just saying, in that movie, you see the mama start tripping, and that was a real mama reaction. Yeah. I left my kid at home.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah.
So, we need to turn this mug around. We need to get this plane together. I'm gonna need for y'all to stop acting up so we can get home. So I can get home.
Mm-hmm. So this is developing as now. From what I know, the deal has not been actually made or set in stone, but. This is the biggest facility I've heard of so far. We've had reports of existing county jails like leasing out beds to ICE and working with them, but this is going to be an actual facility dedicated strictly to putting innocent people in detention. And this is probably going to be like one of the big immigration struggles in Michigan in the coming year.
Here's
my crystal ball.
This is the problem. This is the problem, though. We have Border Patrol already does the job that ICE does. ICE was created, and for those who do not know, it was created in 2003 during the whole rise of the Patriot Act. So ICE is just an extension of destroying our constitutional rights and amendments. And also on top of that, you're making the neighborhoods that undocumented immigrants in our state live in, you're making them unsafe because of this new threat to their lives. Why do I say that? In cities in California, and California became a sanctuary state, right? In cities that have high immigration families, the local police departments say that it's those people in those communities communicating with the police officers that help them find the criminals that affect their communities. If you're threatening to lock them up, and if you're threatening to strip them away from the only land that many of them have ever known, then you are causing harm to that community, because they would rather not talk to you and stay in the country and be still being abused by the person that's hurting them than actually talk to you and having the situation being alleviated. You're making our communities less safe, and you're making creating more of that division between the law enforcement, who's supposed to be protecting and serving, and the immigrant families who's just trying to make a better living for their lives, are just trying to make a better, trying to have a better life. Mm-hmm. So, and that's the biggest problem with something like this.
No, yeah, exactly. Like I completely agree. And I mean, you got any thought on, like, so I was talking a little earlier about, like the big thing they're pushing to the people who actually live there is like, oh, this is going to be a boom for like the local economy. And, if I were living there, I'd be like, that's awful. You're trying to like bribe these people to, basically let this, amoral detention facility be built in their backyard.
There are other things that could be a boom to the economy. Raising the minimum wage in your community will be a boom to your economy. Creating having mortgage controlled and rent controlled apartments, so people are not spending half or more of their paycheck just on rent. That would be a boom to your economy. You can giving people health care would take off the burden from employers, and they can put the money that they're taking out of those employees' paychecks into their employees' pockets. That's a boom to the economy. So when you talk about it being a boom to your economy, let me also remind you that slavery was a boom to a lot of people's economy too. Yeah. But a lot of the people that was doing the work were not getting paid and were living in horrible living conditions. So saying that it's a boom to your economy is an absolute cop-out. You could completely and utterly take that to Saint Elsewhere, as a famous hip-hop artist once said. Yeah, take that to Saint Elsewhere, because I ain't trying to hear that here.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
If you know about Tribe Called Quest, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. So, you know what? I think what we'll do, because we're about to shift topics anyway, let's do a quick little break, come back, and then, we got a lot to talk about. So, this is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in the Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So, we're talking before the break. A lot of these topics are related. So let's talk a little bit about. We're going to be talking a little bit about some institutional racism, some white supremacist groups. Did you hear about this story from Grand Rapids, Lawrence?
What story from Grand Rapids? Are you talking about the one you sent me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I read that a little bit.
Yeah.
So inform the public.
Okay, so up in GR, so here's what happened. There's this 12-year-old girl and her family. Her family called the police because of something that was going on in the neighborhood. Excuse me. So what happened is police overreacted once they didn't find anything across the street. And hold on, let me make sure I'm getting this right. So, they came after a 911 caller told dispatchers that her adult daughter, this is the mother of the kid we're about to talk about, saw someone shoot one of her neighbors. Officers came to investigate. They later found out that it was inaccurate, so they ordered everybody out of the house of the people who called 911, checked them for weapons, and then her 12-year-old daughter was handcuffed. Handcuffed, people. And by the way, I just want to, like, a little side note, the way this is written, I'm getting this from an MLive article, and there is some weird and wonky bias just in the way that this is written. They emphasize that Wooden's daughter was handcuffed for less than 2 minutes, and her 10-year-old son and her mother were not handcuffed. So it's like, hey, they didn't handcuff her that long, and at least, they didn't handcuff a 10-year-old or, like, an elderly woman. So it's really not that bad.
Like handcuffing a 12-year-old, like handcuffing a 12-year-old from a police officer is not going to be traumatizing to this kid and or community that sees the police already as a military force in their community, not to help them, but to make sure that they behave, or to occupy them the same way that Israel's occupying the Gaza Strip. Like, yeah, that's not gonna lead to any long-term trauma to this child by handcuffing them. Yeah, let's just go with that.
Yeah, and it's like, so, the article goes on to talk about how, like, she talks about, like, being traumatized, and also the article really abhorrently talks, it's like, well, she's taller, so she's like, but, so, yeah.
Let me speak on that. I'm gonna speak on that. So, a recent study just came out, and it comes to the biasness of black children when it comes to other races. As it turns out, shocker to most folks, that black children are looked at as older, more aggressive, and much more violent than their white counterparts. Case in point, the 9-year-old child that was accused of groping the bodega woman in New York.
Yep.
Or the 12-year-old that was handcuffed by the mall cops in Chicago. And the police officer was calling for a 227, which is an active warrant. A 227 on a 12-year-old at a mall that's with their auntie. Like, the idea that black children are older, much more aggressive, this is not something new. Think about what they said about Tamir Rice and Michael Brown. They said, the officer said about Tamir Rice that, and same thing with Quan McDonald. They said that that he looked older than what he was. That they looked aggressive. That they looked monstrous and whatnot. And these were teenagers and kids. The same adjectives that I said this on the show before, the same adjectives that they will use to celebrate LeBron James for a great game is the same adjectives that they will use to justify you being locked up, brutalized by the police, and or being murdered.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely right. And actually, hold on just a second there, Lawrence. Maybe you could speak a little bit on that.
Let me continue, because I know you gotta handle some business. The thing is that we need to give the same train of thought when we see young white children. We need to give them the same courtesy as we do other children and other people of color. The reason why it's necessary is because we don't want young white children to be shot and killed within 2 seconds. We don't want young black children to be shot and killed within 2 seconds. But it happens to black people more often than it does disproportionately to white children. That same officer, if that situation was someone shooting in a white neighborhood, he wouldn't have dragged the family out of their house. He wouldn't have handcuffed a little 12-year-old white girl. That same situation would not play out if the roles were reversed. A black officer would not do that to a white family.
And like I'm really glad you brought that up, because the story is focusing on the cop handcuffing a 12-year-old, which is, it's egregious, but it kind of just glosses over the fact that, like, this family that had called 911 themselves basically got treated like criminals by the dispatching officers. They investigated, they didn't find the thing that they called 911 about, so immediately they turned the suspicions to the people who called them in the first place, asking them to evacuate the home and, like, check them for weapons. Like, you said, that does not happen to white families.
Right.
Yeah.
White families are not going to be victimized by the police officers that's supposed to serve and protect them. But a black family that calls a police officer because some stuff is going on in their neighborhood may have the cops turn their sights on them, especially around the 1st, the 15th, and the 30th, because police officers got to make their quota. So they're going to be looking for any and everything, even you, to victimize. And this goes back to something that I wanted to talk about on the show, this epidemic of white people calling the police on black people. This is a prime example of weaponizing if you're going to end up, this family called the police officers to help them and then end up becoming victims themselves. And then over this past week, we saw a number of stories of white people calling the police on black people, weaponizing the police, because either they don't understand the plight of black people and the police in today's society, or B, they do understand what's going on with black people and police in society, and they're threatening black people's lives with whatever interaction that may happen with the police officers, because they feel like they need to feel safe and or feel their supremacy or whatever their deal is to be to oversee the humanity of the other people that they're dealing with. And that is the problem. That is in this story, like the other stories that I'm talking about, if you don't know what I'm talking about, there was a lady in a bodega in New York. She was at the counter. A 9-year-old kid had a backpack. The backpack was a little bit wider than the kid, so she thought that the black kid grabbed her butt. Did not happen.
He was 9 years old.
He was 9 years old. So she threatens that she's a police officer, and she calls the police to come and deal with this black mother, her 9-year-old son, and her 5-year-old daughter. And her 9-year-old son and 5-year-old daughter are crying and bawling because they think that the son's about to go to jail.
Yeah, and it's exactly like, I mean, it was very important. It's like, white people know what they're doing when they do this stuff. It's like, I am going to terrorize you with this phone and my threat of calling the police. It's like they are aware of,
I have been aggrieved. Yeah. I have been aggrieved. You are not respecting my authority as an aggrieved white person. So I will call the police, and I do not care what happens when the police get here. I just want to feel better about what happens. I just want to feel better about the situation because I have been aggrieved. That's literally the underlying message that we have here, and it's absolutely disgusting, man.
And it also speaks to just like, what kind of culture, and you think like the response to, I mean, let's say like a kid actually had accidentally touched your butt, or even on purpose. if you're in a community, you have a conversation with the mom. It's like, man, your boy just touched me. Like I remember,
you have a conversation with the 9-year-old boy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Young man, that was inappropriate.
That was inappropriate.
You know what I'm saying?
It should have stopped and started and stopped right there.
You know it's bad because in that video, it was another white woman that came up to her, and the other white woman was like, "What are you doing? What? Why are you taking it this far? What are you doing? You need to cease and desist with your life."
It's escalating too quickly.
There was another story about a white lady at an apartment complex, and I think this was in Atlanta. The black dude was trying to go into his apartment complex. He has his key fob in his hand, and she's standing in the doorway like, yeah, can I help you? What are you doing here? I think it was apartment loft Amy or something. That's what they nicknamed her. Oh yeah, because bodega, corner store Caroline. That's what they called her. And then you got apartment loft Amy or something. And
I like the illiterate. Yeah, don't call police on people who ain't doing nothing wrong. You might end up getting an alliterative nickname. So
I mean, you had Pool Patrol. Pool Patrol Pete. You had Barbecue Becky. Yeah. I mean, like, I'm waiting for us to go through the entire alphabet. Dog. Like, we seriously, I guarantee. By this time next year, we will have gone through the entire alphabet of white people calling the police falsely on black people, and I believe, especially in the case in New York, that because that white lady said that she was a police officer and she wasn't, that she should be getting some jail time because
that
you cannot
is a crime.
Because you cannot impersonate a police officer. So, like. And she says on video, "I'm a cop," and then she tried to pull it Donald Trump and said, "No, I did not say that," even though it's on camera. It's on camera her saying it. Okay, but there was another story, but to segue into something a little bit more serious, about crazy white folks, man. Andy, I'm not going to lie to you. You need to get your cousins, man. You need to get your cousins.
Well, I advocated sending all of us to the moon, and then Facebook clap back.
Oh no, you can't advocate.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'll tell that story a little bit later when we're talking about internet censorship because I just thought it was funny.
Oh yeah, dog.
Facebook
and Twitter has been tripping, dog.
Oh,
over 800. Yeah. Okay, but if you have been in the know recently, we talked about this on the show a little while ago, that there were some derogatory language and swastikas spray painted on the north side on some playgrounds in the north side. And the rumor has it, and this is why I'm calling it a rumor, because it still hasn't been
I don't think there's any like CCTV footage or anything.
Yeah. So the rumor is that there were a group, a white supremacist neo-Nazi group called the Proud Boys in our area, and that these Proud Boys spray painted, were the ones who spray painted this, the playground on the north side, or Northern Park.
I do want to follow up with that and say, like, the Proud Boys, they have been in Kalamazoo. They've been spotted at a couple of the rallies that happen in Bronson Park, usually not in groups larger than like 3 or 4.
They've also been spotted at Louis.
Yep, Louis and Shakespeare's, which, again, good praxis to Shakespeare's for kicking them out. But this story you're about to tell me, this really explains, because if you were to ask a Proud Boy, he would say, we're not racist, we're just defending our ideas, and like, as a matter of fact, we're inclusive, we let non-white people in, which, by the way, like, whenever I think of the Proud Boys bringing up that point, have you ever seen The Spirit? You know that scene where Samuel L. Jackson is wearing a Nazi uniform? Like, yeah, that's what pops in my head. But like, the story you told me about the Proud Boys, I hadn't heard this aspect of it, and I was like, whoa, you serious? So
okay, so
go ahead and take it.
Okay, so there was there's been 2 stories that's been in the news recently. There was one story that happened in Portland, where some Proud Boys had some weaponry, some guns and stuff, and there were some anti-fascists that they ended up clashing with and haven't getting into a fight. The police officers didn't arrest the Proud Boys for the weaponry that they had. They arrested the anti-fascists. Now look.
Oh, of course.
that's not the story that's much more relevant. The story that's much more relevant is what happened in New York. So the founder of the Proud Boys, Gavin, I forgot his
McInnes or something like that. Yeah.
He was a former member of Vice. He's anti-Semitic. He's racist. He's a white supremacist. He's David Duke likes. He's a much younger version of David Duke. Mm-hmm. He was invited to the Republican a Republican meeting / party to speak, and they gathered the Proud Boys and one of the Proud Boys to join them in New York. They went there to celebrate a Japanese socialist being murdered on national television during the 1960s. If you don't know what I'm talking about, a fascist in if you understand, about 10, 20 years after World War II, there was still fascist people in Japan, right? And there was a socialist that was speaking on national TV, and it became a national incident because the socialist was murdered by fascists on national television. So that's crazy. After the meeting / gathering,
and I just want to pause for a second before you tell a story. Like that part, I was shocked when you told me like they were openly. Like, it was just a dinner to celebrate, like, this Japanese socialist getting murdered.
Yeah. That was why they were gathering.
Yeah.
I mean, are you kidding me? They were gathering last year as they were gathering, this is not new as fascists. They just got done gathering in D.C. To celebrate the Unite the Right rally that killed Heather Heyer. Mm-hmm. So they just recently was trying to celebrate the death of a socialist recently.
No, I'm not gonna lie. When Henry Kissinger dies, I'm probably gonna throw a rager.
Oh, are you kidding me?
But
we're getting down.
Henry Kissinger actually did some horrible stuff.
No. So let me
not
finish.
To distract, but go on. Yeah.
So let me finish. The guy. So there were some anti-fascists there. They broke some. They was alleged that they broke some windows. That they were throwing bottles. Now look, this goes back to what I've said on this show about Antifa before. I do not want you to engage in violence because the right wants to, and the right has more weaponry than we do. So when you engage in violence, that's what they want. You're taking the bait. And I've also said, but if smoke does come to you, then please defend yourself. So 3 anti-fascists were still around when the Proud Boys came out. Apparently a bottle was thrown, and after a bottle was thrown, the Proud Boys jumped on these 3 anti-fascists, and it was like 15 versus 3. So
yeah, I'm gonna say one thing too, like don't do that when you're outnumbered. It's bad.
Again, if you grew up in the hood, you got jumped, then you understand. You don't back yourself into a corner, and you don't try to fight a number that's larger than you. It will turn out bad. So Gavin end up jumping on these people. The police were there. They break it up, but the police did not arrest the Proud Boys. They arrested the anti-fascists, which again, if they were breaking stuff and they were throwing bottles, you don't harm people. That's illegal. Don't do that. They weren't the ones that was getting their head stomped in. The Proud Boys was doing it. And then afterwards, Gavin, the leader, basically held a katana in the middle of the street.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah,
he held a sword.
He was brandishing a katana in the middle of the street, basically shouting to his people before he got into a car. And the Proud Boys didn't get the 9 Proud Boys, 9 of them that were identified. Did not get arrested or they've been calls for arrest, but we don't know if they've been arrested because the leader of the Proud Boys said that he has friends with the NYPD. He said on Twitter that he basically said nothing's gonna happen to my people because I have friends with the NYPD. He basically said that, and I'm like, all right. that doesn't sound like there ain't no neo-Nazis or Proud Boys
Well, I think I mean, the government's known since at least like 06. There was like an FBI report back then even that talked about just the infiltration of law enforcement by white supremacist groups.
Right.
And it's like, that is a real thing, everybody. Yeah. Please understand that.
Yeah. So this is the thing. The only reason why these people are now looking to be arrested, I don't know if they're going to be arrested, but looking to be arrested, is because the videos of their brutality was shown online and went viral. So again, folks, I don't mind you protesting and speaking out against fascism. If you're a part of Antifa, I do not mind you speaking out against fascism, because we don't want fascism here in America. But do not take the bait when they want smoke with you. Understand that they want violence. They want to be violent, because a part of the code of the Proud Boys is to not masturbate and to go out to meet women. But a lot of them are a bunch of incels. They're a bunch of, and remember, a lot of that incel community have been turning out mass murderers like Marvel's turning out Marvel superhero movies. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, for real. Yeah. So these are violent extremists who believe in a white supremacist ideology that's looking for violence.
And they believe that they're the victims, too. Like,
right.
That's important. I mean...
So guys, people, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, chicken, dogs, cats, and everything in between, I need y'all to understand that if you want to protest against the Proud Boys, you want to fight back against white supremacy, do so, but do so peacefully. Because when you start attacking them, then you're making them the victim, and you're giving them a right to fight back. If they start it, then defend yourself. I want to be clear. If they start the smoke, then give smoke. But at the same time, if you're there because you want to exercise your free speech rights, exercise your free speech without causing harm. Because as soon as you start causing harm and violence, that's what they're going to use to justify their violence.
Yeah. I think too, like, I mean, you could have a kind of nuanced conversation about like throwing the first punch and whatnot, but I would say though, I mean, you see these guys out in like a public space, like a bar or something, like, don't be quiet. They are there to spout their ideology and like wear their colors. They're think of like people who would like openly go to one of our Kalamazoo businesses or establishments wearing a swastika or like a Klan hood. They know
what they're doing.
Yeah, they know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing.
Yeah, and I would say like don't let them just eat in peace. I wouldn't say throw the first punch, but we have a right as a community to tell people with those toxic kind of ideologies to GTFO.
Right.
But,
you can go kick rocks with no socks. You know what I'm saying? Like that's you can have your opinion about someone's ideology. You can tell if you want to tell people how you feel. You also have to be ready for the consequences that come back to you, because that means they get to tell you how they feel about you. You know what I'm saying? So you have to be ready for whatever you put out there coming back to you. So if there are some businesses out here in Kalamazoo, y'all understand that these Proud Boys they're basically the definition of a gang. There's no difference between the Proud Boys.
I mean, Gavin even self-describes their group as that.
No, Gavin, and this is the thing about Gavin that's not being talked about. Gavin's been on Fox News. He has his own thing with CRTV that's on YouTube. He has advocated for violence. He has advocated for violence against women. He's advocated for violence against the LGBTQ community. He's advocated against violence against minorities. This dude is not he's not someone who wants to have a conversation in a meeting of ideas like how I have conversations online with some of my conservative friends. He's not like you. He wants that smoke. He wants that violence. He's advocated for it. So if you are associating yourself with that group, please know what you're doing. That group is no different than if I was to join the Bloods or Crips.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And, it's important that you bring up, they give this guy a platform. Like you said, he's like on Fox News. And again, they try to... Part of what they do is they use this inclusiveness as a badge to say oh, we're a legitimate group. We're not like the Klan. We're not Nazis. But they use that as cover to basically push for these violent right-wing extreme ideas that do call for a form of cultural homogeneousness. Blah. Sorry. Yeah. So I'm thinking, Lawrence, from here, do we want to move on to another flavor of racism, something a bit more institutional and widespread?
I have no problem with that.
Yep.
I mean, we can talk about that. We can talk about... there's a couple things in the news that we could talk about. I just don't feel like talking about Kanye. That's the other thing. Actually, I have a quick thing to say about that. Mm-hmm. It's just one quick thing that we can say about that, and then we can move on to another topic. Look, I have no problem having conversations with people who do not believe in the same thing that I do. I do not have a problem with having conversations with the police or with people of power and people who have power and who affects policy. I have a problem with you taking up that space and you not knowing what you're talking about. Because if you are here to try to help my community, yet you do not know anything that's actually affecting my community, you are taking up said space for someone else who is doing so. Because Martin Luther King met with LBJ, and LBJ was a racist POS. But he still did policies that positively affected the nation as a whole and my community as a whole. So again, I don't mind people going to have conversations with Trump. I don't have mind having conversations with people who don't believe in the same ideology as I do. But at least know your facts and know what you're talking about before you make a fool of yourself.
Oh, yeah. And to Kanye's credit, he actually did bring up a few positive things, like stop and frisk in Chicago. But, yeah, like you said, it was a completely mixed bag. I think he once said he's an avid non-reader. It really shows.
It was a bag of, what's that? Bean bamboozled, like those beans that look like good, them beans that look like they're gonna be tasty, but then they taste like double the rotten eggs or something. It was that. It was a bag of those with most of the good candy out.
Yeah. So obviously, do you want to talk about voter suppression?
Oh man, let's get it.
This was important to me because this is the biggest story that no one's really talking about, and I want to directly recommend. I'm going to be quoting a bit from a Paste magazine article that just when we were leading up to the show, I said in our group chat, I was like, there is so much of this stuff going on everywhere. We just need to do a roundup, and this is actually exactly what this article is. Look it up. It's called "Republicans Are Disenfranchising Thousands of Minority Voters Ahead of Next month's midterm elections." And I'm just going to lay out just the particular states where it's most egregious. So we got Indiana, our neighbor. This is something Greg Palast has been talking about for a long time. But he said... in this election, provably, they've purged no less than 20,000 voters. Could be as high as 450,000 voters, actually. Indiana even went on to admit that thousands of voters were canceled in violation of a June 2018 federal court order that barred the state from using the notorious interstate cross-check system. So it found out that the report found in total, Indiana canceled the registration of, and this is the exact number, 469,000 voters, and that's equivalent to a little over 10% of the registered voters in Indiana's 2014 midterms. Now let's go down to Georgia. So here's the particular thing. Brian Kemp is running. He's got the Republican nomination. He is also the Secretary of State. Now, for those of you who don't know, that is basically the state-level government position that has the most control and oversight over state elections. So what happened? What's going on? You can already tell there's probably some tomfoolery, going on. But according to some records from his office, there were a huge number of registrations flagged. Could be as high as 53,000 because it ran afoul of the state's exact match verification process. Under that policy, information on voter applicants must precisely match information on file with the Georgia Department of Driver Services or the Social Security Administration. Now, here's where, again, it gets interesting. How does this affect people down on the demographic level? An analysis of the records obtained by the Associated Press reveals some racial disparity. Georgia's population overall is 32% black. The list of voter registrations on hold is nearly 70%.
Yeah.
70.
Yeah.
Not 7, not 17, 70.
So what you're saying is that number over 7, is that number under 69 carry the 1.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you got to carry that extra, that 1. Yeah. So here's the thing. Here's the thing. I'm not going to act like voter suppression does not happen in the Democratic Party. This is something that I actually wanted to talk about. Because in New York, you got to register 6 months before an election to make sure that you're registered to vote. And those kind of tactics of them purging Bernie supporters in the 2016 election was a real thing, and that does happen. So the Democratic Party is not so racism and discrimination plagues both parties. The problem is that one party does it brazenly, and one party does it in the open to the point where they just want to roll back the progress that we made in the 1960s because those voters are not voting for them.
Yeah, I think like a good analogy would be like when it comes to voter suppression, Democrats, they stay in house and they do it with a pistol, then they attach a little silencer to it and they go put. Right. Republicans, they just show up with a machine gun and like that's just yeah.
Republicans are trying to drone strike the community when it comes to voter suppression.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
The thing is this. The fact that you're not going to accuse, like in Atlanta, in Georgia, you're not going to accuse yourself and you control the voting in your state. So that's like we're having a cooking contest. Not only did I pay for the judges and the venue, I also paid for the food that we're going to cook in this cooking contest, and I already know what the food is that we're going to be cooking, even though I paid for the judges, the venue, and the food that we're going to be making. You want to talk about a rigged process and making, and again, this is not surprising. Republicans said back in 2002 they don't want Americans to vote. They don't want certain Americans to vote. No. They said this at a I forgot what rally it is. It was on it's on YouTube. I think it was Wayne LaPierre that said it. That no, they don't want certain demographics to vote because they don't vote for them. Why are they not voting for them? Well, it's because you don't support the policies that they want. You're corrupt. There's corruption in both parties. But you're also trying to take away the voting rights of the people that you're supposed to be representing.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So you are anti-democracy. You are anti-free free thought. You are anti-free choice. You are everything that's wrong with. You are authoritarian dictator that would rather be an authoritarian dictator and tell the people who you want to vote because you know that they're going to vote for you. You are anti-democracy when you do things like this.
And, I think I want to even push it further and say, like, I think people who don't know a whole lot about voter suppression, you got to understand, like, this isn't just like a few bad apples in the Republican Party. This is part of their strategy.
They ran the Southern strategy for a reason.
Yeah. It's like as we've talked about on the show, most of the people in this country are a lot more, like, left-leaning, especially when we're talking about social policies. Then the kind of establishment media wants you to think. But they keep people from voting, and they do everything they can to do it. I mean, we're not even just talking about this, but like gerrymandering also.
Look at Texas.
Look at Texas. What's going on in Texas? Which actually, this article doesn't talk specifically about what's going on in Texas.
Let me
explain.
Let me explain about Texas. Texas is just as racially diverse as California. The reason why Texas is as red as it is because the state the state governor let the other officials in Texas dictate the map and how their districts should be drawn. So a state, Texas, which has the same diversity, as big of diversity as California, is red because the Republicans in that state control not only the House, the Senate, and the government, the governorship. They also control how the districts are drawn, and they draw them in the favor of the incumbents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's two other really important examples coming up. So there's going to be a really close election in Florida. Andrew Gillum is running. He's one of the more kind of progressive people who made it to the primary. He's running against.
I got some things to say about that.
Well,
no. We can talk about that later.
I know he's been rubbing shoulders with people like Clinton and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and that's
Cory Booker.
Yeah, and Cory Booker, which is, but
he's the better choice.
He's way better. Yeah.
And same thing with Beto versus Beta. I mean, Beto versus Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is running against Beto O'Rourke, and I'm just so irritated because Beto's pulling a Bernie Sanders. He's being too nice. He's being too nice in Texas. Mm-hmm. You don't be nice in civil in Texas when you're going against Ted Cruz.
Man, you used to be a punk rocker. Some of that energy.
Oh,
yeah.
no. Ted Cruz. Let me explain. No, here's the thing.
Zodiac.
Here's the thing. Ted, okay, no, here's the thing. Beto O'Rourke is such a nice dude, and you can see it when he's talking. When he's talking, you can see it during their debates. Like, they just recently had their last debate, and it's infuriating me because I'm really worried about Beto O'Rourke because he needs to take a 2x4 to politically take a 2x4 to Ted Cruz, because remember, Ted Cruz. Donald Trump said to Ted Cruz that your father helped assassinate a president. He said your wife, he said that I'm going to spill the beans about your wife, claiming that your wife was being very promiscuous. And then he called your wife ugly. And not only did you submit to the Mercers who put millions of dollars into your campaign, they made you phone bank for the man who called your wife ugly and said that your dad helped assassinate a president. And he called you a liar to your face. You didn't even pull up on him. You didn't even be like, yo, you talked about my wife. You need to apologize or you going to get the hands.
I said, the Republican Party had a whole lot of amnesia right after Trump got the nomination.
All I'm saying is that dude is the reason why me and my friends called it Beto versus Beta is because Ted Cruz was a beta. He got demand. He got his manhood stripped away from him and hung like a trophy on the wall.
You can even see it in some of his internet habits. But
all I'm saying is that when you attack Ted Cruz, yes, you attack him on the corruption because Beto O'Rourke doesn't take corporate PAC money or super PAC money. So you can attack him on the corruption. You can attack him and say that Ted Cruz does fight for Texas. He fights for the Mercers, who's from New York, who pays his bills. Now his father and his wife, not so much, because Donald Trump literally said he could do whatever, say whatever he wanted about them, and there was no repercussions. But if you are a donor to him, oh yeah, he'll do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And that's how you attack Ted Cruz. You have to. I need my Democrats to not do what Bill Maher said in his last new rules. In his last new rules, he was right about half the time. He said that we do not need a celebrity to run against Donald Trump in 2020. He was right on that. But he said that we need to get back to normal. No, normal is what created Trump. What we need is a progressive. We need an angry, aggressive progressive. We need a Nina Turner. We need someone who's gonna hit hard, hit and punch back. Because when you do so, we win.
I mean, you run centrist. That's how you get people like Orban, like Trump, like Bolsonaro, who might end up being the next dictator of Brazil.
Like that's how you end up getting when you run centrist. That's how you end up getting the one dude from Montana who voted for Kavanaugh. I can't think of his name.
Oh wait, are you talking about Joe Manchin?
Yeah, Manchin.
Well, he's from West Virginia.
Yeah,
I believe.
When you go centrist, you get Joe Manchin. That's what happens. So dog.
So in Florida, what they're doing is they had like a law in place in Florida for a long time that kept former felons from voting, and they alleviated that a little bit, and then basically the current governor decided to just reverse all that. And so here's a good example. There was 30,196 applications for voting rights restoration. This is from like former felons. Only 3,005 have been approved. That's just under 10%. Rick Scott, current governor, also rolled back the automatic restoration of rights for nonviolent crimes passed by his predecessor. Instituted a 5 to 7 year waiting period for all former felons before they can formally apply for their voting rights. So, I mean, this is some like new Jim Crow, like super explicit. This is exactly what like Michelle Alexander talks about in her book. I also wanted to make sure to talk about what just happened in North Dakota. And this is a part that you might have heard about, the Supreme Court decision, but basically, what's going on out there?
Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to read directly from this, and then I'm kind of going to expand on it. Some of you might have heard about this. This was kind of a fairly big story. Didn't get a lot of mainstream coverage, but I saw it a lot on being tossed around on Facebook a lot. But I'll just read direct from the article. Until recently, voting in North Dakota was relatively easy. The state has no voter registration. Historically, residents could simply show up at the polls and provide some form of ID. Voters could sign an affidavit confirming their eligibility if they didn't have one. GOP-controlled legislator began cracking down shortly after Heidi Heitkamp eked out an unexpected victory in 2012, winning by fewer than 3,000 votes. Republicans introduced a stringent voter ID requirement, then scrapped the affidavit option. Federal District Court blocked the new rules in 2016 as a likely equal protection violation due to the massive burdens they placed on Native American voters. The legislature tweaked the law in 2017. Going on to talk about it specifically, this new provision requires voters in North Dakota to have a current residential street address. Now, if you're living on a reservation, such as Standing Rock, a lot of Native Americans don't actually have a residential address. They use a P.O. box for their mail. A lot of these reservations are in very rural areas, and that's the address that's listed on a tribal ID, the P.O. box. Initially, the district court ordered the state to accept IDs that list a current mailing address, but the 8th Circuit scrapped that compromise, putting the state to reject IDs that include a mailing address but no street address. And again, that's a huge number of tribal IDs. Found out about 5,000 otherwise eligible Native Americans do not have an ID with a current street address. They're not alone. About 65,000 non-Native American voters in North Dakota also lack that ID. And, you know, the really atrocious thing about this, so, again, it reminds me so much of when the Voting Rights Act was initially repealed by the Supreme Court. Because it emphasizes that, like, you can't specifically say... And you know, it's a ridiculous precedent. Basically, somebody would have to come out with a bullhorn. Some Republican would have to come out with a bullhorn and be like, we are trying to keep indigenous folks from voting. Woo! You put it in the name. So, while this in legal language, it doesn't sound that offensive, and I'm sure a lot of people who don't understand how these reservations in rural areas work wouldn't think that's so terrible. But it basically takes the franchise away from Native Americans. I don't think I need to tell my listeners that, they were literally like the last people in this country who got that right. And it's appalling.
There are still people in this country that don't have the right to vote, not just felons. There's 4 million Americans that live in American Somalia, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico. A lot of these places that are American territories that we are still colonizing to this day do not have the right to vote either.
That's true.
So taking away the rights to vote to literally the first people here is not surprising when it comes to America and how they operate, how this country operates. That's I don't know if there's a bottom to the barrel of the disgust that what one party does like this to strip the voting rights away from literal indigenous Americans, but it's literally not surprising. It's not surprising at all.
Yeah. And I wonder, Lawrence, maybe you can tell me what your take on this is, but we'll see how the midterms pan out. But if we end up not doing as well as we get, if it ends up being less of a blue wave and more of like a, kind of a blue tide, small tide or something, could this be the thing that actually gets liberals and Democrats to pay attention to voter suppression? Because, I feel like, 2016 should have been a huge wake-up call. Like we've talked about it on the show, Trump won because of voter suppression. And I think, one of the big reasons...
It's not just voter suppression, because there has been some development on not just the Russia story, but there has been some development on some of the other underhanded schemes.
Well,
there was a lot of things that happened, but a lot of it was also...
This is a very nuanced conversation about what caused Trump to become president. But I'm just saying, if
you haven't seen Fahrenheit 11/9, which is Michael Moore's film, when it talks about how talks about how when President Obama came to Flint and did that publicity stunt, drinking the water, how it came out that Donna Brazile was feeding Hillary Clinton questions that the Young Turks in WikiLeaks broke. It comes out that they basically was funneling money to that the Democratic Party was acting as an arm of the Clinton campaign. A lot of that and a lot of the establishment BS between the media and how the media portrayed this race, especially giving Trump billions of dollars of free advertisement. There was a bunch. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of blame to go around. But also at the same time, to answer your question, the black community has been talking about voter suppression for a long time. We've been talking about it basically since after Reconstruction, after slavery, during Reconstruction, and up until we got the right to vote, and even after. We need not only our representatives. What we need is a retooling of how we vote in this country. There's no reason why we should vote on Tuesday when most people are going to be at work. We should make voting a holiday so everybody has a right to participate.
And it's kind of like a lot of we talk a lot about how other developed Western countries do certain social programs a lot. Voting is way different everywhere else. Like most countries, it's either it's compulsory or they at least they make it as easy for you to vote as possible. Things like automatic registration, voting day a holiday, like these things are just like taken as normal and kind of taken for granted.
But the thing is that the American system, the American electorate is not designed to get out to vote. It's designed to suppress voters because it was easier to control the masses when you had a lack of information. Yep. We don't have a lack of information in our day and time because we live in the age of the internet. Yep. So if we could register online, if we could vote online, if we could have when you see things that happen in Georgia where they are shutting down voting stations, so people have to go to other counties to vote, so the lines are longer. The lines are longer for people who have to go back to work or whatever, and they're voting on their lunch break. You see these underhanded tactics that they pull to suppress the vote and the will to vote. But I need, not just for my young people, I need young people to go out and vote. I need everyone to make their voices heard, even if you do not agree with what we talk about. Mm-hmm. You have to, because one way or another, we have to make sure that we do not, we survive, and that we can leave something better for people who are behind us, because it's not just about us anymore. Mm-hmm. It's about those who are coming up, and we have to have that engagement, and you have to have accountability. If you don't like something that's going on, if you didn't like what happened with Kavanaugh, if you don't like that Trump had 15 women say that he sexually assaulted them, if you actually really want to know about the transcripts between the server in Pennsylvania and the Russians, if you want to know what happened with legalizing marijuana, I mean, Canada just legalized marijuana this Wednesday. Mm-hmm. So I mean, let's talk about it. If you have something that you're upset about, or you have something that you want to vote for, you need to make sure that you go out there and do so.
Yeah, and I think I just want to put a pin on this topic and say, it's like Greg Palast said. He's a great investigative journalist. He does some of the best work nowadays about election integrity, and he said, remember, if voting wasn't important, they wouldn't be trying so hard to stop you. And I understand a lot of people get despondent about this, just the extent to which they just disenfranchise people. And my thinking of it is, it's like we got to mobilize even harder. They strip 70,000 people off the voting rolls. We need 140,000 people to come and vote out in their place, and that's a tall order. And it's hard too, because ain't nothing about the American system fair. It's not fair that this voter suppression is happening. It's not fair that most of the time we don't have actual progressive candidates to vote for. But when I went to so I saw Angela Davis a few weeks ago, and Charlene Carruthers, and she made a really great point about the Democrats, they don't do nothing for me. The Republicans, they do things to me. And while it is frustrating to get these do-nothing liberals in office, it's 10, 20, 30 minutes of your day, and you could be stopping a right-wing demagogue from getting into a position of power. So I think let's... Lawrence, while you're still here, I really want to talk about this internet censorship story that's been going on.
So let's take a quick break, and then let's hop on that, and then I can leave around 6:30.
All right, that sounds good. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution. All right.
WIDR would like to remind you to please drive safely. Drunk driving not only puts your life in danger, but the lives of others as well. If you find yourself stranded somewhere, consider calling Drive Safe Kalamazoo, phoning a friend, or having an Uber pick you up. Thank you for listening.
and gentlemen, we are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So, this is a topic we haven't touched on this for a while, mostly because it's been fairly quiet on this front for a bit. There was Alex Jones got knocked out off of Facebook, and there was a kind of a discussion about censorship then. But recently, those of you, like, I imagine most of our listeners probably subscribe to a lot of, like, political meme pages and information aggregate sites. I mean, that's how millennials and Gen Z get a lot of their information, because good God knows the mainstream media ain't giving it to us. Right. So what happened on, I can't remember the specific day. It was just like last Thursday or Friday. Facebook censored several very high-profile, very largely followed pages. This included things like the Anti-Media, Free Thought Project, Countercurrent News,
Policing the Police.
Anti-Media had like 2.1 million followers. The Free Thought Project had 3.1 million. Police, similar numbers. And all of a sudden, you woke up one day and they are no longer on Facebook. Now, this is something we've been concerned about for a long time, because especially in the wake of Russiagate, one of the things we've been talking about on the show, our big critiques of Russiagate, is this kind of call from both the government and a lot of liberal activists for Facebook to more to curate or choose what kind of content it should allow on its platform, particularly when it comes to political speech. And also talking about, my main discussion about this is their justification was they wanted these pages off their site because, we're coming up to the midterms and they don't want a situation like 2016 where there's quote-unquote Russian bot pages spreading misinformation. But a lot of these pages, again, they are not from a troll farm. They are not Russian bots. A lot of these pages are operated and organized by independent journalists, bloggers, and people who just want to stand up on a soapbox. A good example of this, so the Free Thought Project, they share a lot of stories from websites like Truth Out and Truth Dig and Mint Press News, a lot of anti-establishment journalism that doesn't get, much mainstream play on websites like Facebook and Twitter. And you are effectively cutting off information that is dangerous or unwanted to get out by the establishment media and the government, et cetera, in the name of preventing another Russiagate issue. And without going into the minutia of like how effective a few Russian bots may or may not have been, the fact that they're using this as justification to shut down American news pages run by Americans should scare the hell out of everyone.
Yeah, basically, I mean, here's the thing. It's these places are shutting down. This is why our solution that we talked about it was some of these media platforms need to be run like public utilities, and they need to be treated like the new public square because they have such a monopoly on where people get their news and information. A lot of these things that they were citing. First of all, before I even get to the things that they were citing, Facebook teamed up with Henry Kissinger and other right-wing authoritarians to dictate what pages and what things should be taken off or should be censored. That's a problem. That is being done in the censorship things are being done in the dark. Two, the justifications that they're using. Oh, these sites are trying to drive traffic to their websites. Yeah, that's what you do on Facebook.
That's how the internet works.
Yeah, that's how the internet works.
Yeah.
You drive traffic to what you're talking about because you want people to know what you're saying. this is not real human interaction, because when you post something on Facebook, it also pops up on Twitter. Yeah, because you can link your Twitter to your Facebook page so that when you share something on Facebook, it also shares on your Twitter. That's how it works. So you're punishing people for using your platform the way that you designed it to be used. That is the problem, and you're taking away hundreds of hours of these people's livelihoods. You're taking away the income that they are using to support themselves, because the people that you are in bed with do not like the fact that the Free Thought Project was anti-corruption and anti-war. Anti-media was anti-corruption and anti-war. Policing the Police was about police accountability and corruption.
That really disturbed me too, because Policing the Police, and there are other pages similar to that, like Cop Watch, Cop Block, etc. That they literally function in a way to help communities keep their own police departments accountable. And the fact that Facebook is going out of the way to censor that because they think it might, rile up tensions leading up to the midterm election, you are taking an important tool away from communities in order to prevent and basically be a watchdog over police brutality. It's insane.
Yeah, and that, imagine, I might think of the basic implications that Facebook is saying. We are a platform that allows anyone to speak their mind, no matter how odious or how uncontroversial their language may be, and you're going to take away the Free Thought Project. You're taking away something that's literally talking about or trying to have conversations about what is going on in our world, thinking freely. You're literally shutting that down. The thing that makes it also very upsetting is that it's not just Henry Kissinger in the Analytica place that's dictating to Facebook that they should be doing this. There was a story that came out recently that Israel said, we will not, Israel government went to Facebook and said, we will not allow your platform to be in our country if you do not take down these Palestinian websites.
Pro-Palestinian and pro-BDS movement.
Pro-BDS movements and pro-Palestinian groups on Facebook. And Facebook did. Facebook complied. Because they're a business. They're about maximizing profits. So here's the thing. When I still stand behind the fact that Alex Jones should have been taken off, because slander, defamation, and harassment should not be on the platform. Mm-hmm. That actually goes against the terms of service. And that's what he was doing. There was a lot of groups that's what they're doing. These projects, like these groups, like the Free Thought Project and other things like that, no, they had multiple millions of subscribers, and they weren't doing that. They were informing people about corruption and what was going on in the world, and that's how you know that this was some really shady garbage, and that the explanations that they're using do not meet up to their standard, because it goes against the rules that they're saying that they've put out there for everyone to use.
And I'm really glad you bring that up, because I think it brings up a point about false equivocation. So even a lot of anti-establishment journalists who I really respect, people like Abby Martin, Jimmy Dore, have been like, we warned you about, see, when Alex Jones happened, we warned you this would happen. And let's be clear, the worst thing I've ever seen the Free Thought Project do is post a debunked statistic. They did not call for people to harass the parents of dead children. I'm sorry to interrupt. Oh, go ahead.
But also, they were already, during the YouTube apocalypse and the adpocalypse, they were also doing that on Twitter and on Facebook as well. Lee Camp was talking about this for a long time. Mm-hmm. That Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, because they're getting more in bed with very shady people, that they are stifling and or demonetizing news and information sites that are anti-corruption, that are now a part of the establishment bubble. So it was already happening. We've already been seeing this happen. And then this is the thing that we've been warned about ever since net neutrality. So this is going to get worse before it gets better. But that also means that we also have to have a serious discussion about what other websites are alternatives, what other places can we go, what other sites can, what other ways that we can get our information out there. Because if Facebook and Twitter starts doing this, there's no other place. We have to start looking for other alternatives, or we have to start treating those places like public utilities.
Yeah, and I gotta say, like, you know, there's a lot of like kind of left liberal type people who are probably totally fine with this, and I think that takes us down such a dangerous road because, you know, we've got this kind of equivocation where if you are sowing dissent about the American government, American imperialism, American capitalism, it's been kind of smeared that like it's either like a foreign plot or you are somehow going against the interests of the United States. I mean, I've even seen articles where it's the same people who talk about like they're using this independent group that has nothing to do with Russia is using Russia-like tactics to sow dissent. And if we are not able to have to critique our American government and empire and all of that, like what is the left really for? What are we there to do? And you know, also you know, the way that a lot of these liberals equivocate, you know, the groups like, you know, Free Thought Project or, you know, Redacted Tonight to be just as bad as something like Alex Jones because they also like question, you know, American institutions and sow dissent. It's appalling. It's scary, and don't think the opposition won't step up and use that against you as well. I was reading this really fascinating article about how, you know, Trump administration has recently been saying a lot about Chinese interference in the midterm elections. Here's a prediction. If the Democrats do really well in the midterms, what do you think the chances are that the Republicans are going to start their own, like, kind of Chinagate thing and say that, like, oh, it was foreign influence that caused all these, and, you know...
Are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me? They did like 9-12 things about Benghazi. Like, you don't think that they won't come up with some other boogeyman scare tactic thing? Like, like I absolutely do not... I do not in any way, shape, or form think that Republicans will not find a way to scare up a new boogeyman. I mean, they've already been doing so by calling the left mobsters, like the left mob.
Oh man.
Like, I ain't afraid about that, but so that's gonna come when it comes. But this censorship thing that they're doing without any transparency, that they're doing with that they're doing in the dark, because they want to take away not only just right-wing thought, but left-wing anti-corruption, anti-establishment voices. Yet they're not going to address the mainstream media when they're pushing war and they're giving airtime to fascists. Shows you who they have an interest in and shows you who they are really benefiting. Because people like you and me who have a very small voice, in comparison to large multinational corporations, they're not going to be as worried about us as they are about people like Redacted Tonight, Truth Dig, The Young Turks, Secular Talk, the Jimmy Dore
As
Show.
far as I know, the Hoodrat Strategist page has not been taken off Facebook yet. So.
Well, we need to start promoting. We need to start promoting the page more, and then when we start promoting the page more, we can.
Then we can get censored.
Yeah. We're gonna have to start promoting the page more. We need to start videotaping our sessions, and then they're gonna be like, "Hey, nah, y'all getting too big. Cut that out."
And I will kind of cap off this topic by saying too, I've noticed, and this is like a little bit more anecdotal, but a lot of my activist organizer friends have been getting a lot of direct, they call it Facebook jail, when you violated community standards with this post, And for things that are a lot more innocuous and kind of head-scratching, I want to give a personal example real quick. I've got a couple of organizer friends who got banned for similarly frivolous things, but Facebook brought to my attention a post from 3 years ago. I wrote this in response to, this is the same month that Rachel Dolezal was outed as a white woman pretending to be black in the NAACP, and there's also the Dylan Roof shooting. And I basically advocated, if the rest of humanity got together and just sent us being white people, to the effing moon, I really couldn't blame you. White people are effing insane. And I got banned for like 24 hours. Because I'm so racist against white people.
Oh my God. Look. I don't look now. Look. All right.
What's your opinion on white lunicide?
Yeah.
Lawrence.
All right. Hold on. Pineapples. Okay.
Pineapples. Yeah.
Here's the thing. Look, I'm not a black separatist. I'm not for separating people based on their race and whatever. When it comes to you need to stay in your corner, stay in your bubble, whatever, or stay in your section. Don't mingle with other people, because we're social animals. We need other people to survive. I'm for equality. I'm for economic opportunity, not outcome, but opportunity. If I said it before when we were talking about on this show, when we talked about Jeff Bezos, I ain't got no problem with Jeff Bezos making his money. Make your money. I do have a problem with the fact that taxpayers are paying for the healthcare and housing of your workers, and you're the richest man in the world. That's not fair.
Yep.
And you're not paying your fair share of taxes. So that means those workers have to pay extra out of their small paychecks because you refuse to do your part. I do have a problem with that. And so for me, it's about not only acknowledging the humanity in other people, but it's also about understanding that we are all here and we have to work together. We can't be on this Iran way of looking at things, because that means the subjugation of other human beings are what we have to continue to have, and the oppression of other people is what we will continue to need to get by. And I do not accept that as a way of life.
And to be serious for a second, I think, my own personal view is, we really need to have like a true American class consciousness that integrates, kind of a proletariat working class consciousness that melds together with, and I'm not talking about like liberal identity politics, but the particular like identity politics that recognizes the unique racial and racist history in the United States. I think we all need to get together as a group, as a collective, and basically tell the 1%. It's like, well, you need to pay your fair share of taxes, and if not, we got these rockets.
It's it's
send you to the moon.
It's basically what FDR said. FDR said, like, look, y'all can. FDR went to his millionaire friends and was like, look, either y'all can pay these people a living wage, or they have knives and pitchforks, and this will turn into the French Revolution really quickly. And we are in that time now where we have the same wealth disparity since we have the same amount of wealth disparity since the Gilded Age. Like, we are in those times. And people ask, why don't millennials buy houses? Why don't millennials buy cars? Millennials have student loan debt that's just as high as mortgage debt. So you wonder why we don't buy things, we rent. Because we are in a consumer-based economy. Yeah. The consumer dictates how well the economy is going. Since that is the case, you need to put more money in the hands of consumers so that we can stimulate and raise our economy. Because if no one's buying anything, that means there's no money going nowhere. That means, all right, the rest of us are starving, but y'all have money and food. Guess where we're coming to get some money and food? So yeah. I mean, it's simple. It's simple at the end of the day, man. Like, as complicated as people want to make things. But yeah, dog. Like, I actually gotta go.
All right.
Yeah.
Actually, that'd be a good time to. I'm going to segue into. So Nora hasn't been on the show
Support Canada.
Yep, she's in Canada. She hasn't been on the show in a couple weeks, but she is. She's in Canada right now, and she actually did a very impressive interview out there with a Canadian LGBTQ plus activist. It kind of like intersects with immigration rights and LGBTQ issues. So I want to go ahead and spend the last chunk of the show playing that interview for y'all listening at home. So keep your dial locked. Going to have that coming for you. And thank you for listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program.
Only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution. Now, I am here just northwest of Toronto, Ontario, in Canada, with my good friend Theron. Say hi.
Hello, Kalamazoo County. Hi, Nora. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, pleasure to have you with us. So, Theron, tell us a little bit about yourself and about the organization that you work for.
So I work for a rapidly growing organization named Rainbow Railroad on contract. I should say that again. I always get made fun of at work for leaving that last R. Rainbow Railroad. And we rescue, with assistance, LGBTQ people from governmental state persecution and relocate them to safe havens. So we work extensively with the Canadian government, navigate a lot of world's, ILGA, Egal Canada laws, and also local laws to make sure people get to safety.
So what kind of stories are you hearing about from people trying to leave these persecutive environments? And where does this usually come from, do you notice?
So the majority of our work is done in Jamaica, and Jamaica, despite being, quite relatively close compared to some of the other countries we assist people from, is known for its extremely high percentage of churches, the most in the world per capita, and also its incredibly backwards laws regarding queer and trans folk. And so a lot of Jamaican men, women, and trans folk live in the gullies, and so are homeless. They're often, as our executive director says, it's the only place in the North Americas and the South Americas where gay people are actively hunted, and
Yikes.
It is something that is our biggest focus. And other countries we help frequently, Uganda, Kenya. We have a whole bunch of other countries that we do work in as well. In sake of confidentiality, you will be hearing more about this in a documentary by 60 Minutes coming shortly, a little segment, but I just would like to keep it a little bit confidential. But we do work across the world, so
that's really fantastic. People I might not expect Jamaica to be one of those places based on what people's preconceived notions about the country would be. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But that's interesting to think about. I know in the Americas that I think Guatemala and El Salvador are especially bad. That's where Roxy Hernandez was from, if you heard of that story. And so what kind of services are you able to provide these people? When they leave your organization, what they're in Canada, they're able to escape this circumstance, but they're able to work and live there, or what can you tell us about that?
So actually the vast majority of our refugees are not able to come to Canada because the sponsorship process is long. The Canadian government is actually not the greatest at taking in refugees. That honor goes to Kenya with the highest percentage of refugees taken in. And also, for us, we have two sponsorship options. One, we get folks on private settlement teams to help us sponsor refugees. It takes around 10,000, or 12,000 a refugee to get them over to Canada, set them up. Or in crisis situations, we have been known to strike deals with migration officials and the Canadian government to get large people, amounts of people over quickly. The crisis in Chechnya with gay concentration camps, the crisis in Cairo after two activists raised the rainbow flag, and then there was a hunt across Cairo in Egypt for gay and trans people. So we're able to do that very successfully. And then when we do get to Canada or other countries, usually Europe, Spain, England, sometimes the Netherlands, like all those countries that generally have a bit more friendly and progressive migration laws, we are able to, as soon as they arrive, claim asylum. And then they are usually able, especially in Scandinavian countries, to go on public assistance right away and be pretty well supported. In Canada, it's a little different. We have to literally, unless they're privately sponsored, if we bring them over ourselves, we have to provide living expenses, like we provide their housing, we provide their initial costs. We have to do that until they get residency status, until we can put them, on a local job agency, or job, I shouldn't say agency, but a job program with the government. And so it is a process, and it is extensive follow-up, which is what we're working so hard on now, because getting people out of a country simply isn't enough. You need to make sure that they're not going to be vulnerable once they arrive, right? So we are definitely, upping our sources and resources to make this happen.
No, that's really fantastic. And I guess from what we understand in the States, we're seeing some of the moves that the leadership in Canada is making, but there's a difference in, of course, their rhetoric and what's actually happening. There's a lot of things that they probably are and aren't doing to help these people, even if they're just trying to look good compared to what's going on with what we have here. As far as I'm aware, you don't have anything like ICE or any children cages, do you?
I mean, you know what? Apart from Indigenous schools and schooling, we are publicly cage-free, and so that is something that I've been following really closely in the States. And the horror is
that spits in the face of both of our countries' legacy of being this what was normally a very consistent haven for this kind of
sea
stuff.
To shining sea, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. But maybe not so much anymore. But
at least you have radical movements that have actually gone all the way to the courts to stop a lot of the actions. But
what kind of stuff you noticed that in Canada? In terms of people really standing up for immigrants outside of this specific organization?
I would say that Canada has a very public, overt reputation about being a country that does value diversity and the melting pot. I would say that for the most part, as a white person, of course, I've, as someone who's not a migrant, I have different experiences than someone who's a newcomer to the country. But from my experiences talking with our newcomers and many others, they found that the people are wonderful to them. Despite, some rising cases of Islamophobia, especially after Trump won, there was a kind of a copycat rash in Canada. But apart from that, people are generally quite friendly towards migrants and refugees. However, services are not, they're at capacity. And I think that, especially with their current government change, as you probably know about, and the Premier of Ontario being elected and being staunchly anti-migrant and just super racist in general, that we're really going to be struggling as a charity who does the work that we do in navigating these resources, right?
So, I guess with the new Ford premiership, and we covered that him getting elected on the show, but we haven't really had a lot to talk about him since then. So first of all, how's
he won't exist? Keep going.
If only that simple. So how has him being elected to premiership of Ontario affected immigration in Ontario, and I guess also what you're doing over there?
So I should be so lucky to say that as of the moment, he's only been in such a short time that his only changes to policy was only with, overturning a notwithstanding clause or invoking a notwithstanding clause, which is the first time in Ontario history to literally cut democracy in half by the councillors for Toronto's huge city. And also, he's taken away paid sick day protection. He's frozen the minimum wage. And as you can imagine, he's been caught with his neo-Nazi friends and, is totally not apologetic. And
is there a specific fascist figures that he's been taking pictures with, or?
Yeah, so there are some very well-known candidates running for mayor that he has been taking photos of. He's been connected with the Young Alliance of fascists, basically. I don't know what they call themselves. I'm sure it's something
freaking radio.
But it sucks because
that's all right.
Yeah, we're fine. This is alternative. But at the same time, it's only a matter of time for us before we run into something in terms of our access to services. Like, imagine like the redistribution of allocations. Like, I'm sure Ford will be like, the bootstraps all over again, and you know how that goes. And so we're quite nervous, but we don't have a reason yet, because we have more of a relationship with the federal Canadian government at this point, and government like agencies. Thank goodness we are able to sidestep a bit of that trauma. However, in Toronto and the general area, that's a scary part, right? The resources that you could take away and allocate. We don't have a safe house for recently arrived migrants, and that's something we want to set up so badly, to have a house where for like 2 or 3 months at a time, when we first get people in to get started, that we're able to house them and make sure they're okay, instead of paying exorbitant Airbnb prices, putting them in precarious situations. And with taxes going the way they are under Ford, we're nervous. So
I do remember him like specifically saying stuff about finding new efficiencies to cut taxes, which is probably right wing for we're going to make cuts to social services. Oh yeah. But
for real, it's
like the stuff that you mentioned him doing, like I've talked to you about this in person before, is like kind of similar to what's happening in Michigan, like with the cutting the amount of city councilors in Toronto is like to like leave more of his cronies in, is very similar to what the Snyder administration here in Michigan has done with so-called emergency management. Is that happening just in Toronto, or is this like other cities that he's cutting the amount of counselors in?
So far it has only been Toronto. He's also scrapped Indigenous Reconciliation Acts, and also canceled living wage pilot projects where like 4,000 Ontarians were given like a life a guaranteed income, right?
Wait, so there's a sort of universal basic income program?
There was a program that was like getting,
Wait, when did it start? Like, how exactly would that work?
It started, I believe, like under a decade ago. I'm just trying to remember the exact date, but like it was a pilot project set up by the government to see if we give everyone in this city, regardless of job or income, a guaranteed income. And if they make over a certain amount, parts were taken away, but very, very little. Like, you get to make quite a bit. If we do this, like, how will the quality of life? And of course, as you can imagine, given the subject of this show in our politics, it worked out incredibly well. Like, people were really supported, really could afford their lives, and
how much was this guaranteed income?
It wasn't
roughly
extensive. I believe it's around 16 a year, but
16 Canadian. 16,000 Canadian dollars. So roughly This would be like closer to $12,000 US for our listeners at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, that's not enough if you want like a really comfortable life where you're able to enjoy amenities. But it was enough to cover people's like basic daycare and their bills. Oh, yeah. And like to make such a huge difference, like it gave some dignity back to a lot of groups who were struggling. And
12,000 boost to anybody's income can like, even on top of like, a terrible minimum wage job, could really like make a huge difference.
Exactly. You could actually afford to, do what Doug Ford says he promises to get people back, $1 beers, and be able to buy a home for,
oh my gosh,
for super cheap. Ridiculous.
So, like, what is this other than like the whole $1 beer thing? What other like ridiculous stuff has he said that he's going to do that you think he might actually try to do?
Oh my God. Well, I would say, Nora, that you've been pretty in touch with Canadian politics. Is there anything that you're worried about, first of all, like from what you've seen here?
I've heard stuff about like him trying to go after queer positive sex ed, and like I would assume that he would like be more aggressive to immigration in Ontario because it's a common pattern among like these right-wing populists all over the Western world.
Yeah, I know.
And
yes.
I wouldn't call myself super in touch, and this is like, kind of more questions for the listeners.
Yeah, of course.
But
the sex ed you mentioned, but keep going, yes.
I guess we haven't heard a whole lot of like the stuff that he's like been saying, leading up to him becoming premier, other than the $1 beer and like just the general sexist stuff about some of his female political opponents.
Yeah, and it's really difficult because working in the industry, so many of us would like we would keep up to date, of course, but in terms of burning the details in our memories, like it was very difficult for us to like involve ourselves in that work, because all we hoped for was that he would not possibly get past the eyes of Ontarians. And now we're very obviously paying very close attention. Before we voted against, of course, we voted did our duties, but the sex ed curriculum you mentioned, he actually reverted it back to the 1998 curriculum.
Oh, wow.
Which doesn't include texting or sexting or any trans identities or anything of the sort or queerness. And so as you can imagine, like growing up with a sex ed you had in 3rd grade, like for myself and for yourself, like, I don't know, kindergarten or something of the sort, like that existed then as like an upstanding document. And it's kind of horrifying because like we all know as queer and trans folks how crucial it was to know more about what worked for us, and that heterosexuality and cisgender, options weren't the only ones. And to hear that taken away was such a blow.
Yeah, I can imagine, because like in the States there's so many like states around the country that you're not allowed to have queer positive sex ed. Like they Well, sometimes they do abstinence only, but like they'd have like a lot of very specific state laws that would ban like any positive mention of LGBTQ identities within like sex ed for kids. Yeah.
I wasn't sure, but nothing surprised me at this point.
Oh yeah.
Sorry about that.
What else was I gonna ask? So this Wednesday is gonna be a very special day in Canada. At 10/17, perhaps the new 420 in the Great White North. They're gonna legalize weed nationwide. The second country in the world to do that after Uruguay, if you could guess it.
I did not until you told me. I'm very happy to know that now.
So what's your take on this? How do you think this is going to affect this like nationwide, and how do you think it's going to affect it, I guess, more regionally to Ontario?
So I do, of course, welcome the opportunity for folks who use cannabis to do so openly and without, any kind of repercussions. However, we know that that's not the case, considering intersectional identities. And, just like in the U.S., if the U.S. ever got to that point of legalization, there would be so many reparations to do for the folks of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are thrown into jail for minor offenses of possession, like of a gram. The first headline of Botham Jean, who was shot by the police officer in his own apartment, was that, the headline later was like, he had weed in his apartment. So obviously he was, caught up with something horrible. And that was, an example of the disgusting kind of like racialized aspects of cannabis being legal, is that, so many white people have been able for years to kind of flaunt this law, open, weed cafes, make hemp and cannabis, extracts and be like edgy or cool or just like really hip, man. And then, Black folk, Indigenous folk, have really been punished heavily in police. And so for us, like, it's a bit of a bittersweet moment, but at the same time, there's also some really strict new laws going up. Trudeau mentioned that anyone under the age of 18 in Canada, or 19 in Ontario, I suppose, 18 overall, because adulthood, anyone who gives any weed or purchase it for a minor gets up to 14 years in prison.
Oh, wow.
And so that is like ridiculous, considering some aspects of sibling life and general families, of who will go around weed as a normal thing, just like cigarettes, and I do worry about the implications of that being upheld, I should say. But it honestly feels really good to be in a place where people who have medical, cannabis licenses no longer have to renew or prove or, advocate for their disability or their need for this, when we all know the benefits. How about yourself? What are you looking forward to Wednesday?
This Wednesday, I'm going to enjoy myself. I'll be a good law-abiding non-citizen around here, but...
Yeah, okay.
But, like, I guess, is there any plans for like specific reparations for these groups? Because like I know in California that when they legalized it, they took away a lot of people's criminal records from it, and in Colorado, the first state to legalize it, they took the tax money they made from it and put it almost immediately into their roads and schools, and their roads and public schools are doing fantastic since then.
Damn.
What kind of effects do you expect to have on this going back to the people who have been hurt by the drug war, and like how do you expect the tax revenue made from this new cannabis to go into Canada, whether it's through social services or something that it probably shouldn't go to?
I mean, it really depends what populations have the highest degree of reparations. For me, I strongly suspect that Indigenous folk, who make up like a huge percentage of our prison populations due to systemic racism and colonization, like who knows, like, if you have folks on a reserve, for example, where, there are quite a few reserves, like a lot of chiefs, sanctioned by law, and in the government. Who knows about specific laws on these areas? And I do very much worry for my Indigenous, activist friends, how those laws will be enacted fairly on a self-sustaining, reserve environment, right? Or city in its own. So, I think that folks are a bit worried about that, especially, the stereotype of, shiftless, Indigenous folks, or, the negative aspects of cannabis portrayal. It's, it's really difficult to see the perceptions of indigeneity as, intrinsically reliant after generations of trauma on drugs, and then have this, become legal and suddenly cool and no longer imprisoning folks for this. And I grew up in a town with a huge prison population of Indigenous people. So and so I'm wondering, so
as far as they're not gonna erase any criminal records?
As far as I know, they're looking into it for reparations, but we are just not, to my knowledge, at the point where I know anything for sure. So I would love to know that for sure, but I do expect that it's going to be very difficult for if Indigenous people are released en masse, for small offenses of carrying cannabis, to get any reparations, because look how hard it's been, even with, getting reparations and apologies from this government.
It is.
So I think we're going to go ahead and leave it there. It is about 7 o'clock. There is about 10 more minutes of that interview, and we will make sure to put it up online when we upload tonight's episode, which should be happening either later tonight or early tomorrow afternoon. So I want you to thank you all for tuning in to the program tonight. And also, just a heads up for this weekend on the 19th, on the 20th, there's a couple of very important things going on. There's going to be a gerrymandering rally up in Lansing. And there is also, for those interested in the subject, there is going to be an All Kids Matter March up in Grand Rapids. If you are interested in organizing around what happened to the 12-year-old in handcuffs, I believe that is the 19th, but you just look that up, find out more about it. I want to thank y'all for tuning in. This has been the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. All of y'all have a great night and keep on fighting for that revolution solution.